All right, we're live. All right, welcome back to the Wholesome Financials podcast. My name is Austin.
Susie.
And we are Wholesome Financials. It's our mission to help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business by getting access to capital using personal credit cards and leveraging their personal credit. And so we love helping purpose-driven entrepreneurs grow and scale their business. How you doing, babe?
I'm doing good. Not feeling the greatest. Just a little sick, but we still got to give out value. So here we are. We do. We have to give out value. And today's episode is all about NAICS code. You saw it from the thumbnail, you got it from the title. And so we're going to talk about why NAICS codes are important for getting business funding. So let's jump right in. Suze, can you tell the people what is a NAICS code? Yeah, so in simple terms, it stands for North American Industry Classification. And it's basically a number that's used and given to you so that they can categorize your business. So whatever industry that you're in, this number will put you in like a bucket. Think of it like a bucket, and that bucket categorizes you as a real estate business, as a consulting business, as a trucking business. Yeah. It kind of encompasses all that.
Yeah. And it's used by federal government, federal statistic agencies specifically. This is where they pull metrics about the economy. They pull metrics about how businesses are doing. When you see metrics that say such and such businesses fail, they're referring to, if you want to know what businesses within what industry, they're looking at their industry classification system, specifically the North American one. That's where NAICS codes comes from. So some businesses have low risk NAICS codes. Some businesses have high risk NAICS codes. And really, like what we're saying is, like, the NAICS code is completely paired with the industry. So some industries are high risk, and everything that we're talking about, just for context, is within the lens and purview of banks. All we care about is how banks see our business. That's all this podcast is about.
Yeah.
Is how banks see your business. Now, we're not truckers. We're not in, you know what I'm saying? So keep that in mind. I'm not saying these industries are bad. We're just giving the perspective of how banks view some of these things about our business, right? That makes sense? That fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And very specific also to business funding, right? So we're talking about NAICS codes and how they relate to business funding, because that is a very important, crucial step that I think a lot of people miss. And then they wonder why they can't get approved, they got denied, or maybe they got a low limit. So we'll dive right in and give you all the details.
All right. So with that said, some businesses are in high-risk industries, or they have, which means they have a high-risk NAICS code attached to it. And some are in low-risk industries and have a low-risk NAICS code attached to it. And there's a bunch of different things that scream risk to a banker. Specifically, when it comes to the risk being involved, one form of risk could be your overhead, how many employees you manage. Another form of risk could potentially be the industry that you're in, right?
Yeah, it depends, because you might be in an industry like trucking. I'm going to use as an example, where you are on the road, and it's a big liability. You could, get into a big accident, or death might be involved. So overall, it is considered a high risk. So lenders are always looking at that when they're considering how much money to give out to those type of businesses.
Yeah, 100%. Also, entertainment is a risky industry. If you're doing anything in food, that is technically a risky industry. Restaurant, food truck, doesn't matter. So for banks, if you're in that industry, 9 times out of 10, if you created your LLC or you did your business formation, obviously with your business in mind, right? You're going into trucking. I'm going to create a trucking LLC. You probably added on to it a trucking NAICS code, which is a high risk NAICS code. And so the reason why we're even talking about this is because, great business model. A lot of people make a lot of great money. But when it comes to getting funding for your business, I don't know if I'll ever tell the bank that I'm in trucking. You never want to present that. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about how we view NAICS codes, what are some strategies to use to get around if you are in a high risk industry. How can still present yourself in a fashion that's not scary to banks, even though you might be doing something scary to a bank, which would be operating in one of these industries, right? So So let's talk about banks and lending. So it kind of goes without saying, banks don't like high risk industries, right? They don't like high risk NAICS codes attached to LLCs, right? So what do they like?
Yeah. So for keeping it real simple, like the banks will give you the most money if you have a business that's considered low risk or have a low risk NAICS code. Okay. And so some examples of those type of businesses are, consulting, business management, e-commerce, marketing. And the reason why those type of businesses are low risk or even neutral sometimes is because there's not a lot of overhead. Most of the times you can run that type of business with just like one person. You don't really have to have that many employees.
Yep.
You're not really spending a whole bunch of money to run a consulting business.
Yep.
And so to the banks, those businesses look very, very attractive as opposed to maybe real estate, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about why real estate might be considered high risk?
Yeah, well, real estate amongst it. I mean, I can go down the line. Real estate, consider high risk to a bank, mostly because like these properties could fall out, and depending on how you have this property locked up, tenants are flaky. You might have an empty property. It's easy for people to go under in real estate, and so the bank doesn't want their money to go under with them. If you're in trucking has a high liability because trucks are expensive, and those trucks cost a lot of money for maintenance. And obviously, you don't get paid if you're not moving. And so banks know all these things, and so they're like, "Well, I'm not trying to lend money to somebody who could potentially be on the side of the road, or they might not be able to make their money back and get it back to me, right?" And going back to real estate, some people just break even. Some people don't even cash flow those things. Like it's a struggle, and the markets go up and down, and that's the other part that banks don't really enjoy about lending for businesses that are in real estate for that reason. And then when I also think about overhead, I think about restaurants, right? Restaurants have a lot of employees. You got to buy product. You have to have a brick and mortar to some extent, whether it be on wheels as a food truck, or you have to rent out some space, and business can go up and down. You're selling one service, a bunch of products, but one service. And the restaurant industry is not a consistent industry. So these are all things that are, I would say, very similar to that speak to that overhead piece that you're referring to, that extra cost that might impact your business. And if it impacts your business, it impacts my money, my way of getting my money back. And the banks, their whole job is to manage risk. And so that's something that they could be looking out for.
Yeah, absolutely. So on top of, we've named a couple already. Oh. Yeah.
I'm sorry. We'll keep that in there, though. That was good.
Apart from real estate, which you did a really good job, by the way, kind of going into
thanks. I appreciate
the different ways why it's considered high risk, even though there's really good upside, right? You can make really good money.
Yeah.
We've gone over trucking. Another one might be investing. Like, so if you're like in like stocks and trading and Forex and crypto, I mean, yes, you can make a lot of money, but also at the same time, you can also lose a lot of money, right? So it's very hard to get funding from a bank when you're in those type of businesses, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot get funding for that business, right? But we have to kind of go around that, and that's what we're going to go ahead and get into next.
Well, before we go around it, like, how do you know if your business is high risk?
Yeah. So what I generally do is I just do a really quick Google search. So if you're, in the food industry, restaurant, hey, is the restaurant business considered a high risk business? And most of the times you're going to find articles and it's going to say yes. There's actually a website. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll link it to the description below where it has a list of high risk businesses. Okay. If you fall into that category, now you know and you're aware that this is something that might hinder you later on from getting funding. So listen up, stay till the end, because we're going to cover how to go around it and still get funding and not actually be stopped by that high risk code or high risk industry that the bank might categorize you in.
Yeah, 100%. And so with that said, what was your original question? It was, how do you get around it?
Yeah. So how do we get around from getting denied funding because you're in high risk?
Yeah. So what we recommend, so full disclosure, so this is something that we teach our clients in Wholesome Academy. It's It's an online community where it's a bunch of thriving entrepreneurs looking to grow and scale their business and position themselves for funding. And we teach them how to get funded. And we're not a funding company in the sense of we do it for you. It's not DFY.
Yeah.
We don't do it for you, but we teach you how to do it. We do it with you, and then that way, you know, all of our clients, everybody a part of our community, they can take this strategy and fund themselves and teach their friends and their colleagues. And so, what we're teaching you, or what we're about to tell you, is something that we go over specifically in our community. So, what we highly recommend, there's a couple ways to go about it. The long way would be change all of your documents. Go to the Secretary of State, change your LLC, change the high risk name, the high risk code, so it doesn't show a high risk industry, so you don't get the blanks high blood pressure. Now that might not always be feasible because you might actually have to operate your business, right? Like, so truckers, you have to have your NAICS code. If you're going after government funding, you have to have the appropriate NAICS code. And so what we teach is instead create a straw man, create a new LLC that's specifically only for funding. You can have it as a holding company. It can be your actual day business, could be a part of it, wherever the case may be. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're creating a front-facing entity that is appealing to major banks, that's well structured correctly. Yep. And you want to have it with a low risk name in a low risk industry. And then you fund that specific business entity, and then you use the funds from that specific business entity within the rest of your businesses and the rest of your business expenses. Because technically all your business expenses are all together.
Exactly.
So that's what we teach. And so you can keep your and also what we highly recommend too, if you haven't created your LLC, also shameless plug, we help customers form their LLCs as well, just in general. If you haven't created your LLC, what we recommend is setting your LLC up this way initially, and then from there creating a DBA, which is a doing business as, a fictitious business name, and operating your actual business from your fictitious business name. When you go to the bank and you reach out to banks, you're using that LLC that's well structured. Anything you would add to that?
No, I think you covered it really well. I like that whole like holding company thing because you can always, have a holding company at the top, and then underneath it, you can have as many LLCs as you want, which is also what we teach, right? To get more funding, you can have multiple LLCs. So if you're in real estate, have one for real estate. If you're in trucking, have one for trucking. If you are into crypto, have different ones so that you can diversify your portfolio. But the main one at the top would be the holding company, which essentially would be the one that you could use to get funding.
Absolutely. So what are some examples of low risk industries and NAICS codes? Yeah,
so we kind of went over some already, but to recap, consulting is probably our number one go-to business model because it's the simplest, it's low risk, it's neutral, and banks love giving money out to consulting businesses. So the NAICS code for consulting is 541611. Okay, so write that down. That one is very, very important. Another one is marketing, right? There isn't a lot of overhead in the marketing industry. So the NAICS code for that is 541800. Write that down as well. Maybe you could tackle the last one.
And the last one is e-commerce. The NAICS code's 454100. 454100. Those are three NAICS codes that we use for ourselves, that we teach our clients to use, that we've seen a lot of success. We've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding with those NAICS codes. Specifically, the consulting one is the easiest one because anyone can be a consultant, and it's very vague and generic, and it doesn't scare the banks away. And they go, "Oh, okay, all right, here's a consultant." Like, that's not scary. Like, you should be able to get my money back. So anyway, that's what we recommend. So why this is important. Now, maybe you formed your LLC, you started running, and maybe this has never actually come up for you, but now it's a brand new thing because you went to go apply for, when you went to go open an account and they're asking you this question. So this is why this is so important. because you want to make sure you're going in prepared, especially if you're going to go meet with the bank in person, your bank manager in person or bank relationship manager in person. You want to make sure that you have all of these details squared away and ironed out to make sure you have a very, very seamless process. And so, and first impressions are everything. And so if you go there and they're like, hey, what's your NAICS code? And you're like, nah, it's not going to look right. It's not going to look. I also know a lot of people apply online. To each his own. In person get you more funding, but that's why it's so important. But let's say, my LLC isn't really far off. Let's say I just picked a wrong NAICS code. How would I change that?
Yeah. So generally speaking, when you open the account, whatever it is you tell the bank that you do, they will automatically assign a NAICS code for you. Okay. So if you don't tell them exactly what it is you do, if you don't say, hey, I'm in consulting, or I'm a real estate consultant, or I'm a trucking consultant, they're going to pick a high risk NAICS code if you tell them, hey, I'm straight up just doing real estate. So a way to change that, if you've already made that mistake, is to go back to the bank or call the bank and say, hey, I would like to change my NAICS code. And then you give them that specific NAICS code that's considered low risk, like the ones we've mentioned already: marketing, e-commerce, consulting. Honestly, we always tell our clients to go with consulting. You can't go wrong with it. Even if you're in the trucking real estate business, you can always be a trucking consultant, a real estate consultant, and still be in that industry without being categorized as high risk.
100%. Well, that wraps us up for today. I hope you got a lot of value out of today's episode about NAICS codes. Again, my name is Austin. It's my wife, Susie. We are Hosts and Financials. You can find us on all social media, primarily TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It's probably where you're watching this at right now. That's where we spend most of our time. As well as you can listen to this podcast on Spotify. It's available on Spotify.